In this video, I will be going over 3 tough lessons that I've learned from owning rental properties. And my goal with this video is that you can learn from me, learn from my mistakes, and avoid them altogether. And with these 3 lessons I'll be going over, I know I'm going to be saving you a lot of time, a lot of headache, and a lot of money. I am going to be very transparent in this video, so the only thing I ask of you is if you would give this a thumbs up if this provides any value to you. My name is Evan Phoenix, and this channel is all about real estate investing and my journey to financial independence through real estate investing. My wife and I are currently 26 years old, and we built up a portfolio of just over $1 million worth of rental properties. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and get right into it. So the first tough lesson that I've learned is that no one is going to love your property as much as you do. When my wife and I ended up purchasing our 4-unit apartment complex, instead of going out and shopping for contractors, getting bids, comparing the quotes, what we did is actually end up hiring a relative to do all the work on the property. So we ended up not interviewing any other contractors and just giving all the work to him. And since we considered him family, we thought everything was going to go smoothly, but we couldn't be more wrong. You see, when it comes to anyone such as contractors, property managers, lenders, agents, anything, you have to do your due diligence. And that's something that I certainly did not do in the beginning. And you probably could have guessed it, it backfired straight into our faces. So when we hired this person that we considered a family member, he went in there, he did all the work for us, and he said everything was complete, everything was well and good, but then we started having problems. Since we certainly did not know what to look for, we didn't know if things were done correctly or not, we took his word for it, but we ended up having another contractor come in to do some more plumbing work to where he would find that a lot of the work that our first contractor did had to be redone because it was done incorrectly. So to put it in monetary value, we ended up paying about $5,000 for our family friend to do all of the work on our property. But after that was all said and done, we actually had to go and pay another $6,000 to fix the work that was completed on our property. So for a $5,000 job, we actually had to pay $11,000. So where am I getting at with this? At the end of the day, you have to understand it's all about money and business. So now when we hire anyone, we have to have a minimum of 3 different people come out, look at the project, give us a quote, and tell us how much time it would take in order for them to get done. Not only that, but we look into reviews as well, and we contact people to see what their experience is like with certain contractors. The last thing I'll say about this subject is that when we purchased our first couple properties, I was so excited. I think I was overly emotional about it. And unfortunately, that led to me overlooking certain things when it came to our properties, such as these contractors. Being naive and never doing this before, we just thought that when someone gave us our word, they meant it. Now, the next tough lesson that I had to learn the hard way was tenant screening. And you might be thinking to yourself, I knew something with tenants were going to come up because tenants can be terrible and all you hear on social media are these crazy tenant stories. But when I talk about tenant screening, it's not in the way that you think. You see, every property that we purchased to date has had inherited tenants in the property, meaning that when you purchase the property, there are already tenants living there, they're under a lease, and they're protected until that lease ends. Now, what you want to do is you want to make sure while you're under contract on the property to get the leases, look at the financials, and make sure that everyone is up to date with paying rent. And if not, you want to address that issue before purchasing the property. But your boy here did not do that. You see, when we purchased our properties, typically all we did was make sure that they had leases in place, and we did not ask specific questions about rent, if anything was owed, or if they were up to date. And you might be thinking that's pretty idiotic, but while you're purchasing your first, second, or third property, you're so amped up on emotions and you have a million different things that you're thinking about. Whether that be the lender and all the paperwork you have to get to them, with your agent having to go through the appraisal process, having to go through inspections, picking out certain things that you want the owner to fix, or meeting with contractors out there and seeing what you want to get fixed on the property. While all these things were swirling in my head, I just didn't think to check if the tenants actually were up to date on paying. So going back to our 4-unit apartment complex, when we purchased that property, we got the earnest money from all of the tenants, but we shortly found out that 2 of the tenants actually were behind on rent about 2 or 3 months, and we never got paid from them. Once we found out this issue, we found out they were damaging the property and they still told us that they were not going to pay us. We unfortunately had to go through the eviction process during COVID. And if any one of you know anything about COVID and tenants in the mandatorium, basically we could not kick them out because they were protected by the COVID mandatorium. It was so hard to get people into the courthouse to settle these evictions, and it was just a tough situation to be in. Luckily, it was at the end of COVID. We only had to wait 3 months without them paying, but it was 3 months of rent that we did not get from 2 units. Also, we had to pay for a company once they did get evicted to pull all of their stuff out of their unit and then clean that unit when it was all empty and then renovate it in order to get new tenants in there. So it was more costly than we originally budgeted. But this all could have been avoided. What we do now is we actually, while we're under contract and doing our due diligence, we ask for the leases, we ask for their lease application, and we ask for up-to-date financials on every single unit. By looking at the leases, you can see what all it entails, what they're allowed to do, what's responsible for the tenants, and what the landlord is responsible for. By looking at the lease application, you'll be able to check out what their credit score was, how much money they're making, and all the other specific on that specific tenant. And then also looking at their financials, you'll see if they're up to date with paying rent. And if everything checks out, great, continue buying the property and working on everything else you have to do with that transaction. But if they are not up to date or don't check a box that you like, then it goes back to renegotiation and make it known that you are not going to purchase that property unless that tenant is evicted or they pay and they become up to date with all their payments. And the last lesson learned is reserves. Now, when we purchased our very first property in college with no job, I believe I was like 22 years old, we purchased a duplex in my college town. When I say we, my wife and I. But when we purchased that property, we had $6,700 in our bank account. In order to close on this property, we needed to put down $6,500. So by purchasing this property, we only had $200 left over when it was all said and done. And I know what you're thinking to yourself, that sounds horrible and you shouldn't do that. That is 100% correct. That was the most nerve-wracking month of my life. And honestly, I would never suggest that to anyone when it comes to real estate investing. You have to have your reserves. Luckily, this property cash flowed enough. We did get the earnest money and we got prorated rent from that property. So we were able to build a little bit of reserves, but nothing close enough than what you should have on a property. Because right when we purchased this property, we ended up not getting rent from one of the units. The bottom tenant actually stopped paying for about 2 months. Once again, this goes back to lesson number 2 that I did not vet the tenants before purchasing. The tenant kept saying that they were going to pay, we let it slide, and we end up not receiving anything. And ultimately, we got a text message saying that I left, I'm done with everything in that unit, and I've moved down to Florida. We had to first hire someone to get all of his stuff out because it looked like he took absolutely nothing, which was extremely sad, but we had to get it out. So we had to dish out a couple $100 for that. Then what we had to do is go to Lowe's, go to the used paint section and end up picking out the paint from there because it was on discount and it's all that we could afford. And then obviously without receiving rent for 3 months, we ended up getting someone in there. Everything worked out, but if a big expense would have happened, such as something with the roof, if one of the AC units ended up not working or we had to have a repair on that, we would have been put in a very bad situation that I don't know if we could have got out of. So that's why reserves is so important. Right now, what I typically do with my properties is that every property has to have between 6 and 9 months of reserves set aside in that account. So let's say the mortgage was $2,000. That means that I would have to have anywhere between $12,000 and $18,000 put in that account at one time. But we also have a HELOC. So what we do is we use that HELOC for emergency expenses. By having reserves, you do not have to pull out anything against your house or go get personal loans. Thank you everybody for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. I hope these lessons helped you in some way or brought any value to you to where if you were to get started, you would be able to avoid all of the mistakes that I've made and start on a better foot. If you enjoy real estate investing, want to learn more about it, and want to follow my journey to financial independence through real estate investing, then go ahead and like this video and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Happy investing.